We have some more NHL signings to discuss today, led by the Maple Leafs and Ilya Mikheyev. We have some other teams like the Bruins, Panthers, and Oilers with some signings. We have word that the non-playoff teams will get an extended training camp, and the Seattle Kraken have made some very interesting hires as well. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to talk about today, mostly signings and some interesting hires in Seattle and other news, so let's jump right into it. Now, first up, the news that came last evening with the Toronto Maple Leafs announcing that they avoided arbitration and came to terms with forward Ilya Mikheyev on a 2-year contract extension. The contract will have an average annual value of $1.645 million, which is a pretty fair contract in my opinion here for Mikheyev. Now, there is word from some NHL writers, including Luke Fox of Sportsnet, indicating that there is belief that the original agreed upon amount was a little bit higher than this, probably closer to like 1.8 or a little bit better than that, and that he actually brought down and told the team to reduce it a little bit to give them a little bit more cap flexibility, which is like shocking. That's not something you see in Toronto. When it came to the Matthews, Marner's, Nylander contracts, for example, that is not something you've seen at all. So nice surprise there in a way, but obviously a nice gesture from Mikheyev to do that. Soup will remain on the menu in Toronto for a couple more years. I thought he was a nice addition. Should be able to hopefully play in a top 6 role for the Maple Leafs. So they don't have a whole lot of business left to do outside of Travis Dermott. And then, of course, once that's completed, we still might see a potential trade or two out of Toronto to kind of reduce things and hopefully find a little bit more flexibility given the cap situation that they're dealing with there. We had a couple of quick signings as well. One in Florida with signing forward Scott Wilson to a 1-year contract, $700,000. Of course, Wilson's kind of bounced around a fair bit now in the last few years around the NHL, playing with a few teams such as Pittsburgh and Buffalo and others recently, so that's a pretty low-risk signing. Another free agent off the market, and the Bruins re-signed Zach Senyshyn to another 1-year contract as well, except his is a 2-way deal. We'll pay him $700,000 at the NHL level, and obviously a lower amount at the American Hockey League level. I would imagine Senyshyn likely does start the year at the AHL team, but given the injury situation that they have and holes on the team that they're really not quite addressed yet, the Bruins have been relatively quiet so far, so you never know that he could find himself a spot on the roster, but I think he's going to have some tough competition. The New Jersey Devils also signed Nick Merkley to a 1-year 2-way deal as well, paying him an NHL salary of $874,000 and $70,000 at the AHL level. So that's a 2-way deal for Merkley. And we also saw the announcement here that I'm not sure if the Oilers have made it official yet, but NHL insiders are reporting that they've offered a 1-year extension and it is agreed to with defenseman Chris Russell, which is believed to be around $1.25 million. Now, at first glance, I found this somewhat surprising. I've even said recently that if anybody on the blue line would be moved, it would be Russell, and to a degree that does make sense, but here's the rationale behind it. They're looking at this from an expansion draft perspective. I know the news first came from Puckpedia, who's a very well trusted website with a lot of great resources, including salary cap management, similar to Cap Friendly, but they have some different information here as well. If you're not familiar with Puckpedia, I certainly recommend you check it out. It's a great resource for a lot of things hockey related here. With the expansion draft, not only are you only allowed to protect a certain number of players, but the players you expose have to have a certain level of experience as well. So essentially having Russell under contract for an extra year will allow them to make sure that Caleb Jones, Ethan Bear, Darnell Nurse are all looked after in that way. Obviously, Russell will be exposed. There was no form of a no-move or no-trade clause in that extra year, so that will not be impacted. Even though his cap hit this year is $4 million, his actual salary is $2.5 million, so it's another step down. So it keeps him potentially in the Oilers fixture here, and maybe they're hoping that that's a player that Seattle would consider taking off their roster, but we'll have to see what else they have exposed here when we get to the expansion draft next summer. But obviously this is an expansion draft related move, so I wouldn't be too critical of it here yet. At least they're not paying Russell very much next year, and there's no guarantee that he's even with the team. Now, there's some rumors as well that forward Ilya Kovalchuk may be heading back to the KHL over in Russia. Now, of course, we'll have to wait and see what he ends up deciding to do, but there was a lot of talk that he would head back to the Montreal Canadiens and rejoin the team that he seemed to have a nice amount of success with last year. Of course, obviously coming back to the NHL, signing with the Los Angeles Kings. His time in LA was not overly productive, relatively frustrating for him as he didn't really get the opportunity, mainly because it just wasn't a good fit. He just did not produce, was not getting the chance. They had him benched for quite a while before they finally got him moved over to Montreal. But then in Montreal, he seemed to kind of find his game again, fit well with a lot of their players. They ended up getting traded at the deadline because it was looking like the Habs weren't going to be a playoff team. Of course, nobody could have predicted that we had the NHL pause. Ended up having expanded playoffs where Montreal actually did make it. But at least he had an opportunity to play with fellow countryman and friend Alex Ovechkin in Washington, which was, many believe Montreal kind of did him a favor, that they thought there was rumors that he had offers to be traded to other teams with a slightly better return going to the Habs, but they sent him to Washington as a favor. So the hope was that he would come back and sign another contract, probably a little bit more money than he did before. Obviously, when they got him the first time, they got him on a league minimum contract after he got released from his Kings contract. But after how he played, he's probably going to deserve a bit of a raise. Nothing too drastic, of course, but still, at this point, he remains unsigned. And based on the other moves we've seen the Habs make, I don't really think that there's a scenario now where he's going back to Montreal. I mean, I guess you never know, but at this point, their business and their offseason is getting close to the point where they're pretty much done. I mean, obviously there is some question marks, around extensions for a guy like Philip Deneau, for example. But for the most part, it does not looking like it's going to happen for Kovalchuk, barring something unexpected coming to be. So it could be a possibility that he returns to the KHL, and I would say that if he does, that would be the end of the road for him in North America at the NHL level. So we will wait to see further information on that. There is also word that the NHL has agreed that the remaining 7 NHL teams that did not participate in the return to play for the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs will be given an expanded training camp when return to play does take place again, whether that be in the December, January, whenever we get back to having the next NHL season, due to the fact that they never got to play it. So their players have been off the ice for that much longer than the other NHL teams. I mean, if you think about the pause taking place back in March, if we don't get going until, say, January, I mean, that's going to be pretty much 10 months that they would have not played. That's a really extended period of time. Some of those players and those teams have had the chance to play in Europe, but really, in the grand scheme of things, it's a small percentage of the rosters there. So we'll see what happens. There was rumors originally about having a 7-team tournament as well way back. This was back in the earlier part of the summer when everything was being agreed to for the NHL to come back for the playoffs. We haven't really heard much about it since. This is the first rumblings about it because there's GM meetings that have been taking place, which is causing this to kind of come back to the forefront of discussion here. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, at the very least, we're waiting for more details to be emerged and agreed upon for what that return looks like. I'm not sure if we'll have a tournament or not, but either way, they'll have more time to get ready for the following year. And as I mentioned as well, the Seattle Kraken have made some interesting hires. They announced 7 different people that were hired by the franchise today, many of which were in the fitness, nutrition, and different areas of the team, so like the different management areas. And they've hired former NHL player and fitness guru Gary Roberts, who was a tremendous hire. I'm surprised this is the first time that he's had an NHL exclusive contract with the team in Seattle here. So obviously, Gary Roberts, as we know, had a pretty solid NHL career, but at one point it looked like he might have to hang him up at an early age after having some pretty serious neck injuries. And at that point, during his layoff, he kind of started to take his fitness much more seriously and really changed his whole lifestyle and ended up carving out another 10, 12 years of NHL action and then parlayed that into having his second career in the game of hockey, being one of the top fitness trainers outside of that. Like in the summer times especially, he works a lot with some prominent NHL players, including guys like Connor McDavid and Mark Scheifele, and a few others as well. There's quite a few that actually enlist his services for off-season training. I believe his official title is Sports Science and Performance Consultant, so he's still going to be able to run his business that he has out of Toronto with the off-season training and all that he does. Like nothing's going to be changing that way, but he will have an exclusive contract with the Kraken to be a consultant in that matter. So obviously, we know that fitness plays a much bigger role than it ever has before in professional sports, and this is a tremendous opportunity for Seattle to really kick things off in the right way here. Like I said, I'm a little bit surprised that other teams haven't done this sooner. I mean, I think he has consulted with teams, but I don't believe he's had any kind of exclusive contracts in the past. But of course, he and GM Ron Francis would know each other well. They were NHL teammates at one point, so clearly Francis saw an opportunity to bring him on board. Out of all the jobs they announced today, this is the only one that's not really on a full-time basis. He'll still be based out of Toronto and consult, and likely join them from time to time for in-person consultations, depending on how everything goes. Obviously, once the Kraken have a roster in place and are getting ready for their first training camp, I'm assuming Roberts will be much more involved at that point, but it's believed to be mostly just a part-time consultation job, but a great move by Seattle, in my opinion. So that is all your news updates here for today. We'll likely be back a little bit later with some additional videos tonight, so stay tuned for that, and let me know your thoughts on all these additional signings and news we talked about down in the comments so we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.